Quite amazed, I've got to say, quite amazed.
Really exciting. It was, oh my gosh, something's happening here.
Really didn't believe what I felt.
It's the power behind creation, isn't it? So it is powerful.
You know, where do you go from here?
When people use the dowsing tool and it starts to operate on its own and they realise that they're getting answers to questions from a source they've never gone into before, they realise the possibilities of dowsing.
You can be led up the garden path with dowsing very easily. And as you do more of it, you can sense whether you're fooling yourself.
You just have to accept what comes, and it can be no, the answer is not what you want, and you have to accept it.
When you dowse, you can dowse for anything. If the intention is there, you get help to find the answers.
It is possible to extend consciousness to whatever you want to do. And in fact, the old Greeks had a thing where when they were looking at an object, they felt that they were actually sending something out to run over the object instead of just receiving the information.
We all have the ability to be able to paint, divine, do whatever, be the best mathematician in the world. It's all there. We're able to do it, but we need the trigger to start it.
Learning to dowse and practicing the art of dowsing has been a life-changing experience for me. The thing about dowsing, everybody thinks it's about water, but it's about many other things. It's about things like earth energy, and this is when I started to learn. This is the hurlers, and I started learning about earth energy here. I'd be following an energy line, and it came right the way through here, in fact through the stone, through the centre, and it started to go up towards the cheese ring up here. I had never heard of the cheese ring before, and this is the place that led me into a really deep investigation of earth energy. And the lovely thing about dowsing is that everybody can do it, and how good you are depends entirely on how much you're prepared to practice. Of course, dowsing is probing into a sense beyond the five, and dowsers actually are usually fiercely independent people who are not afraid to question standards that they've lived with for a long time. They usually have the courage to probe into areas that other people don't. The first real practical history of dowsing was by Herodotus the Greek, the father of all history. 4th century BC, the Scythians, and he was reporting what was happening in Scythia, and they used forked sticks, he said, cut from the hedges to find water. Now that's the first real record of the history. There's nothing much after that until the mid-Europeans started to use dowsing not just for water, but for finding minerals. Some people don't believe in dowsing and that they say it doesn't work, but this is a case in point. This is Batalic Mine, goes 2 miles under the sea. And these Cornish industrialists didn't waste money. They paid good Cornish dowsers to find 15-inch deep seams in the granite. And these Cornish dowsers learned from a book called De Re Metallica, which was written by a man called Georgius Agricola on metallurgy and the techniques of dowsing. The whole industry depended on the accuracy of the Cornish dowsers, because otherwise they had to drill through many hundreds of feet of granite, and these dowsers would tell them precisely where to drill. So it was the dowsing in the Cornish tin industry that became so accurate and became such a respectable profession that it made an absolutely major contribution to many, many other industries in the country. I'm coming into the pure energy of this lovely St. Guillermo church, one of my favourite churches, in a complete contrast to Batalic and the harshness of the industrial mining industry. The Cornish dowsers were gaining a tremendous degree of respectability with the professionalism of their work in the mining industry. By finding things which are actually beyond the five senses, they were saving the mining fraternity a huge amount of work. And they were quite well paid, actually, in Cornwall at that time. But there was controversy as well, because the church authorities were confusing the word divination in Deuteronomy 18 with divining. The two conceptions got mixed up, because divination is foretelling the future, and divining is another word for dowsing, which is just finding things beyond the five senses. So there was some controversy about the legitimacy of dowsing. And the use of the forked stick was described as an abomination. Of course, the country people still needed water, so quite secretly they kept the art going. The amazing thing is that all churches and all sacred places, meeting places, will have a very special spot that people are drawn to. And it's a subtle energy spot, and you can discover it by dowsing. And the wonderful thing is that this vortex of energy, which is created there by prayer or by meditation, responds to human consciousness. Ghost churchyards are wonderful places to douse. You can do all sorts of things. You can find out the earth energy centre of the churches. You can find out so many different things. Very famous people like Guy Underwood did masses of work on recording underground streams and energy patterns, or on churches and cathedrals and all sorts of ecclesiastical places. Of course, Guy Underwood made a very special dowsing tool of his own. Made a very, very thin wire and little tiny loops, and it piddled around in some way, and he was very, very accurate with it. I find it very difficult to use. And normally dowsing is done by either a pendulum or a rod, and the pendulum looks something like that, and you get results with it whistling around either one way or the other, and the rod is something like that. Some of you might have decided to use rods or pendulums or anything else before. And each one of them, in itself is not important, but it's important that you relate to it, that it's part of you and it's an extension of you, and it's a believable thing because you have to use it to develop a yes and no. And that the whole basis of dowsing is about developing an accurate yes and no. There are more dowsing tools than there are dowsers. And the absolute basic tool is this one. This is the one that I talked before about. It was cut from a hedge, and we have to tension it. The fellows have to be very careful, because once you start to find the water, it goes like that. The girls have an equal problem, because very often when they start doing it, it goes up. And I've seen there great big lumps on their head. Very, very strong action. And of course it was was okay right through the centuries, because some of the authorities didn't like dowsing. They called it divining, and they said it was the work of the devil. And to walk about with a thing like that was like walking with a Kalashnikov. So what they did was cut this from the hedge near where they had to work, because the big thing was to find water. And if anybody came along who was in authority, they'd just break it up, put it under their arm. They were collecting sticks for the fire. We do a little one for the kids, because they can't tension them. A tiny little hazel twig there, and they do exactly the same thing, and it's great. The kids are wonderful, because they reckon this old grey bearded fella could do it, they could do it too. There's never any question. And there's a lovely old chap called Jack Benny who makes lots of these tools. He's 80 something now. How can I say that he's 80 something? I'm 80 something. He's an old man. And that's a pair of horsewhips with a little copper things on it, and that's just as effective. And you can even lose an old bit of curtain rod with a bit of tape around it, and you have to tension it in exactly the same way, but it has exactly the same effect. You pull it out and it's tensioned, and it gives you your indication, the answer to your question. The important thing is the nature of the question. In order to phrase the question, you've got to decide very, very precisely what you're looking for. You actually have to teach yourself a sequence of questions which get you nearer and nearer and nearer the target every time. And each time you use your yes and no, and you go by whatever answer you get from there to phrase another question that gets you nearer what you're looking for. You must develop a very positive yes and no. A yes and no you can absolutely trust. Now this is difficult because what you're trying to do is to get rid of the answers that you are expecting from your logical mind. You're accessing a source of the answer to the question which is not from logic. It's from another part of your mind or your brain, or from the etheric, or whatever you like to call it. And you have to learn to access that. And the only way you can access it is to practice. And you find you're actually dowsing properly when you get an answer to a question that is not the one you expected.
Well, my name's Val Johnson and I douse for health. We find that the root cause of illness is often related to diet, intolerances and allergies. When we're looking at diet, we're looking at whether people are have an intolerance to metals and environmental problems as well, and beverages, all across the board. When you douse, you can douse for anything. If the intention is there, you get help to find the answers. But keep it simple. Don't ask too many questions, just keep it very simple. Just ask one question at a time to allow, the answer to come through.
It's a very discreet model, which is fiberglass, which was used actually by a lovely American lady who was dowsing in cathedrals, and she used to tension this thing, and she was quite plump with a fur coat. Nobody could see what she was doing, but she would douse it for energy in the cathedrals in exactly the same way as you do with a big stick. This is the one I like. It's got a flattened handle on, and I can tell the strength of the energy field on it because I could feel the thing turning. It's very difficult to do that with a round rod, and this is why I use this flattened thing. And when I started, and the first piece of dowsing I did was to walk up the road up here and see whether there was any energy between St Michael's Mount and Trencrom. And I said, is there an energy line between Trencrom Hill and St Michael's Mount? And I walked up the road and I just got that much. And it changed my life completely. And it's taken me around the world for the last 25 years. This one I made from 10mm steel. There are some big forces, earth magnetic forces around here. And I just wanted to see how strong these forces were. And I found that this had worked in exactly the same way. So I thought I'd crack it once and for all. So I made some of these. These rods are 2.5 pounds weight. And once you get them up there, they're just as accurate as the other ones, and they pull towards this magnetic force. So we're dealing with some extraordinary, mysterious thing in dowsing that allows you to detect forces that you can't normally detect. Now the other one, it really intrigued me, was by Alan Heiss, an American dowser, and he did a lot of his dowsing in cathedrals. And he used to find the stuff like that. You wait till the priest pass and go. There's a car aerial. This is one by Rodney Smith, a local dowser in Devon, and he calls it his wiggly thing. And it's about tensioning again. He uses it in exactly the same way, but he tensions this thing out, and when he's over his target, it flips over. I find it slightly difficult to use, but a lot of people swear by it. And this is a bobber. And if you prefer the bobber, it's this. I'll just use that. This little energy center here. I'll just use that as a demonstration, because when you use a bobber, I find it quite difficult. But with practice, you can keep it pretty steady. And when you get over the point of the earth energy thing there, it starts wobbling. You don't even need to cut your wire coat hanger and make it into L-rod. You can use it exactly as it is if you like, and it will indicate exactly the same way that a proper dowsing rod does. And you can even use a child's plastic one, although it's very difficult to justify going down Penzance High Street with one of these.
I'm Daphne Adams. I've been dowsing since 1985. That's officially dowsing, because I've always had the sense that things go on all the time around you. And my younger daughter had an experience which was very unpleasant overnight, and that caused me to contact somebody I knew who knew somebody who knew somebody who knew a dowser, who came over with a pair of rods. I knew nothing about formal dowsing at all, and doused around the house and around the grounds of the house to see if she could find the source of these happenings. And what really happened was that when she'd finished her dowsing, she said to me, "Do you want to have a go?" To which the answer was always yes from me. And I walked down the pathway and down the very substantial angle that was our garden, and the rods went wild. So I was hooked. And ever since then, I've been involved in dowsing. I do all sorts of dowsing, from finding water, finding lost articles for people, no matter if it's a bunch of keys or a wedding certificate or an animal or a lost person, or a person who's disappeared on purpose, which of course alters things considerably. I don't know how map dowsing started for me. I love animals, and I'm very close to animals, and I get on well with animals with legs. And so therefore, that is natural to me. I'm looking for a dog at the moment who's gone missing. I have posted yesterday the map back to the lady and marked on the map where I think she is. And they're going on a search next week, so I keep my fingers crossed firmly. Somebody contacted me a year or 18 months ago. She was in Wales, and she had a dog to whom she was very much attached. And there was a big hill, a slag heap, and the dog was out with somebody else for a walk and disappeared. And she rang me, and I got a picture in my mind, and I just drew a diagonal line on a piece of paper as she was talking to me and put a dot. And I worked out the proportion afterwards, the layout of the ground, if you like. And she'd called in cave rescue. And so I sent the message back, "I think she's here." And they got straight to her, which was very good for me. But that, of course, doesn't always happen.
Pendulums come in very many forms, and it's quite important to get something that you have a rapport with. You have to have the right feeling for it, and gradually, as you use it, you'll get used to that particular material, and you won't want to use any other. There's nothing wrong with using whatever material you like. Crystals have memory. There's a lot of business about cleaning crystals, but as far as I can understand, you just clean it with intent, with your mind. You don't have to bury it for 9 weeks in salt or sand or whatever. I mean, this thing will clear if you just intend it to be clear. Actually, it's nice to select something, because it is an extension of you eventually. It's nice to have something that you like or that you relate to. My really favourite one is this, and you could use the pendulum you wear, and it's always there and it's always very handy, and it's a particularly favourite one of mine. And I think it's nice to have to use one as a tool that you wear a lot of the time, because you become very attached to it. Some people actually like to use a pendulum for dowsing because it leaves a hand free, so they can run it down on a list of allergies, if you like. But of course you can do that too with a dowsing rod. But once you get used to a pendulum, and then keep on with it, I don't recommend that anybody changes. Once you establish your very positive yes and no, and really can trust it. My favourite tools are these rods, because I do most of my work outside. So what you have to do to establish your yes and no is always bring the rods up to the Stewart position. Now, the Stewart position is a comfortable hold, about 15 inches apart, about just slightly higher than your solar plexus, because everything's working from there. And you have to establish what sort of movement these rods will have to indicate a positive yes and no. Absolutely fundamental to dowsing, that you develop the ability of recording a yes and you begin to trust it. That's what dowsing is about. I'm not going to say the right thing to do, because there's no right thing to do with these things. Your particular yes and no will possibly be different from mine. I personally have to have a dynamic. I have to have the rods moving. You can't just stand there waiting for something to happen. You have to have a dynamic on them. So it loosens your body up, and that's the whole thing about dowsing. You loosen your body up and you tighten up your mind. And you concentrate on exactly, and you ask it to show you a yes. Now, my first yes was simply that, with the two together, and my no was quite complicated. It used to do that sort of thing. And after a few months, I started working with one rod to get a yes and no, and mine is very, very simple. I ask a question, and I have the dynamic of movement on one way, and if the rod does not respond at all to my question, it means no. And if it turns like that, it's yes. And it's as simple as that. I'm not saying that's the way to do it. I'm saying that's the way it works for me, and it's the simplest way to work. Now, you will possibly get something else. You might get a no out this way and a yes that way, or whatever. Whatever it is, if you can trust it, that's what you stick with. So mine is yes and no. The thing to do is to practice. Practice is very simple things. Is the electric light bulb turned on? Yes. And these sort of very, very simple questions until you get used to the movement of the rod or the pendulum. And then you start doing the slightly unknown ones, like tossing a coin and dowsing whether it's a head or a tail. Now, when you do that, you'll find that you don't get better than the 50-50 of chance to start with, but practice and repeat the practice, and you'll find it goes from 50% to 60 to 65 to 70%, and then you realize that you can start trusting your yes and no. Once you've learned that, and once you've learned the concentration that gives you the capacity to access this information from somewhere other than your logical brain, then you're a dowser.
My name is Sue Brown, and we're here at Hampstead Marshall. This is the studio at North Lodge, and it was really moving here that got me into dowsing, because we acquired an extra bit of land at the top of the hill just by the church, which used to be a deserted medieval village. And this site, it's got two very interesting mounds, and I wanted to know more about them. And because the land is scheduled, it's listed, I couldn't dig, and so I discovered in reading the newspaper about a man called Edward Fawcett, who was chairman of the Garden History Society and helped the National Trust find old garden designs through dowsing. I eventually was able to contact him, and he came and he dowsed both mounds and the area of the DMV, Deserted Medieval Village. He discovered on the DMV tree pits across the hillside, which he said were about 10 paces apart. 3 years later, we had a geophysical survey done of the Deserted Medieval Village area just by the church, and they also came across these tree pits, which were 7 metres apart, metric. And this was the first validation of dowsing that I'd ever had, which was very, very exciting.
Now perhaps we can have a look at another form of dowsing, which is directional dowsing. This is a demonstration of directional dowsing with two rods. A very special rod has been lost in the field, concentrating totally on it, 100%, and I asked the rods where it is, what direction it's in, and there it is, that way. So it could be that way or that way. So I try again, and I've got another direction there. So I go towards it with the two rods, and hopefully where the rods cross, I will find the dowsing tool. Bingo! If I was doing it myself, I'd just use the one rod, get the direction, walk straight in the direction the rod's taking me, and when I go over the target, I'd find it turned back on itself, and where the handle is bingo. Because you can also do it with a pendulum, and it starts swinging in the direction of your target, and you follow the direction of the swing in a direct line and keep walking until it starts indicating that you're over the spot. The thing about dowsing is you should start on something very, very simple, like something very obvious, because if you try and start with something like earth energy, it's such a complex thing that you begin to lose heart. I want you to walk towards this rope and with your eyes open, knowing that it's there, rods akimbo, and I want you to walk towards it very, very slowly and say, show me the rope. There you go. 1, 2, 3, 4. What you do here is concentrate 100% on the rope. Nothing else exists. And all you do is walk towards this thing and say, show me the rope. Show me the rope. Show me the rope. Show me the rope. And the rods will cross right above the rope. Now, when you do it the first time, the rods might work maybe like that, maybe like that, maybe like that. It doesn't matter how they work to start with. If you're getting a reaction, it's the start of dowsing. Very, very important. Now try it again. 1, 2.
Wow, wonderful.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. There it
So
goes.
that's your
There
way.
it goes. That's fine.
Doesn't matter, 'cause
That's going.
I'm
That's
fine.
going. Your right one's starting to go. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's it. That's right. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. So it's absolute concentration. Walk towards the thing. Walk towards the rope. Show me the rope. Show me the rope. Show me the rope. And you become the rope. You are the rope. You are the frequency of the rope. And then the rods just have to show you where it is. You can do it with a single rod, of course, if you like, in exactly the same way. And you can also, if you like, do it with a pendulum. So you come up in exactly the same way with the pendulum. Show me the rope, show me the rope, and there it is. So no matter what tool you're using, it will react to your interpretation of the frequency of the rope.
I use L rods which go out and cross, and that's what I demonstrate. Most people can use the L rods with very little problem at all. In my understanding, what actually happens is that you specify precisely in your mind and in what you're looking for. Then you access the information field, which then tells you where it is. And then you go out, and the dowsing rods just act as an indicator to let you know where it is. And that's, to me, is the technique of dowsing. Intuition is, in fact, accessing information in the information field. There are about 2 or 3 information fields, one of which is just above the physical, and that is what scientists and engineers access if they want information and they get intuitive information. Then there's another one which is mental, and then the third one which is spiritual. Scientists tend to believe that, in fact, that consciousness is within the fortress of the skull, as they call it. And that is it. And it's only chemical, the things that are going on. Newton believed in this sort of thing. He was, and Flood and Hooke believed in this sort of thing and understood it. But they said, what we will do is to look at only something which we can physically touch. They didn't want to be burnt at the stake as heretics by the church. And that, he said, anything above the physical will be in the province of the church, and therefore we shan't do it. And as a result of that, that's why there's been this focus on the physical, material things in science ever since. But now, scientists are getting to this condition that they are more free and they're more confident. And using the scientific method which has been developed, which is extremely powerful, we're able to start looking at these other areas in a scientific method.
This seems a very simple, almost stupid exercise, but it's very useful actually to enable you to practice using one rod to follow the contour of something on the ground, or a pipe under the ground, or a drain under the ground. Now if you're right-handed, you walk on the left-hand side of wherever you've found, in this occasion the rope, and you pick up with the rod right over the rope, and you hold the rod horizontally, quite firmly, Don't let it tilt to the left or right. Feel the delicate movements of the rod and actually follow them, because it will take you along the contours. And you just follow where it goes. This tells you exactly where the rope or the pipe is underground. Concentrate on the rope. rope. And of course you can do this in exactly the same way with a pendulum. And if the wind doesn't blow it about too much, you can just find whatever it is and then ask for the direction and very, very carefully walk along in the direction that the pendulum points. And this is quite a delicate operation, because you have to follow every time it very subtly moves around, and you eventually trace the whole contour. You can save yourself a great deal of money by not having to dig in the wrong places. But having found where it is, you've got to find out how deep you have to go to find the pipe. And there are two ways of doing that, which I'll show you. First one is Bishop's Rule, named after one of the clergy who invented the system. What you have to do is find whatever it is first, the pipe in this case, register where it is, bring your feet up to the position, and then you use your rod or your pendulum and you walk away from it the distance of the depth of whatever it is. And you ask it to show you how deep the pipe is, and you measure it from there to there. That gives you the depth you have to dig to find that pipe. There's another way of doing it, and that is by bracketing. So you can actually stand on the pipe again and say, is it more than 10 feet deep? And this is your use of your yes and no. Mine says no, it's not more than. Is it between 5 and 10 feet deep? Yes. Is it between 7'6" and 10 feet? No. So it's between 5 foot and 7'6". Is it more than 7 feet? Yes. Is it 7'1"? Is it 7'2"? Is it 7'3"? And that's the depth you've got to dig to get down to where the pipe is to get the leak.
In a commercial sense, I started in the early 80s. I've had my own drilling company. We were very successful, but due to ill health, decided that perhaps the heavy work wasn't what I wanted to do, so now I just go to actually doing the divining side of it, which I can do, and get somebody else in that does all the heavy work. So when I come in and I'm talking to the customer, I'm always divining up to a point. I'm always looking around, I look across, I say, yeah, that's where I want to go. And if I keep looking back, my expression to it is, you can't take your eyes off it. And the case being, I look around the whole site, I still want to go there. No matter what I do, I want to go there. That's my first pull. And then when I start looking again, well, you could go back over here, but that's where it still tells me. And that's my first port of call. If that's convenient and suitable, then we come and drill a hole. I say see it, people say what do you see? The only way I can put it in that sense is, technically we have 5 senses. But to describe it to somebody, I would say to a sighted person, put it this way, describe the colour green to a blind man. You can't do that. I can't tell you what I see. I just know, I feel, I want to be up at that particular point, and it takes me there.
Now, one of the really delightful things about dowsing is, and it's probably the only method you can do it, but you can actually measure human auras and chakras, because they are they are simply biomagnetic fields which surround our bodies. Very, very subtle energies, which are profoundly affected by the nuances of earth energies around us, and it affects our behavior quite profoundly. When we started working first, I used to do it by hand, and I used to be able to find the aura, and you can do that. But when I started dowsing, I found that the aura was much further out. And you could follow it exactly as you followed the rope. You could follow the outside of somebody's aura just by following what the rod does. And it should be centrally balanced around the spine. I do a lot of experiments with this when we're doing teaching and get people to dowse each other's aura, and they find it absolutely fascinating how the aura varies and the size of the chakras and the biomagnetic fields change. I'm inside your heart chakra just now, and the easiest way is to be inside it and say, show me, as you said, show me the rope, show me the heart chakra.
Right.
And it's out here. Heart chakras are very big, and if you're doing a heart chakra, it takes you through the walls and out the windows and over the furniture. So dowsers, being a lazy crowd, they say, show me the heart chakra a third of its size. That's the thing about dowsing, there's no end to the things you can do when you ask the right questions. So that saves you climbing around the furniture. And what you're trying to do is find out if there are any lumps out of the heart chakra. Every living being has an aura, and particularly with trees, you can work with trees and they actually react to our consciousness. So in the classes, what I like to do is ask the pupils, if you like, to select a tree that attracts them and just go up to it and acknowledge it. And then douse its aura, because every tree has an aura, and they are all different sizes. And I ask them to douse it first. Before they start working with the tree at all, just douse where the aura is. And mark the outside edge of it. And that indicates where the outside edge is, just about there. So if I mark that with a stick, and then I ask them to go and hug the tree, consciously say to it, you are beautiful. And let the tree know that you think it's absolutely gorgeous and it's a wonderful piece of natural being that you have a great rapport with. And you can hug it and you can love it and really communicate with it. Now the tree responds to the sincerity of your communication. It knows whether you're paying lip service in this hug or not. So you go out and you douse it again and see if its aura has changed. And yes, it has. The outside edge of this aura is now coming out here. It was there. So you can see that's almost a third bigger. So the tree has responded to a conscious acknowledgement of it, a declaration that you think it's beautiful. And there are 4 items that really are important to become a good dowser. The first one is practice. The second one is practice. The third one is practice. And even if you begin to doubt your ability to do it, more practice. You can do general dowsing and that's fine, it's very satisfying. But if you really want to get into dowsing in a way that is really valid, then you have to become a specialist in some particular subject that interests you. It can be archaeology, it can be earth energy, it can be healing, it can be allergies, it can be anything. Because the big thing about dowsing is that there are no limitations.
I don't know how map dowsing started for me. I remember very early on, somebody asked me if I could find a little kitten who had gone off. And I'm not sure what skill I used, to be honest. I thought about where it was and I drew a little sketch of the area. And yet I tuned into the kitten in a different sort of way and found her.
When I'm dowsing for diets and things, particular food jump out at me on a page without me having to dowse. I was told that that would happen, and the more dowsing you do, the more it heightens this intuition.
You know automatically when you do it, you have an innate sense of whether you're going to find them or not.
They say dowsing, but you become a water diviner. There are so many other things which would be detected by divining. We're trying to eliminate force lines, energy centres, and come back to the water.
I find the most valuable part is getting to the map, establishing the link between the animal's home or wherever we're starting from, and establishing that link in my mind and letting the pendulum take me then.
Archaeologists are not very pro-dowsing unless they've experienced it themselves. Around the country there are dowsers who are working with archaeology groups and with the National Trust and various organisations, and they are getting their dowsing surveys validated.
I have a friend who talked to me, well, I was in a group at the time, and talked to us all about remote viewing. And I thought, my goodness me, that's what I do.
I became interested in remote viewing after reading a book describing the work of the Stanford Research Institute and also the US Army people who were looking at this as well.
I knew somebody several years ago who was an accountant, and he lost all sorts of very important papers, and I could see them and I could see where they were. But that to me is a form of dowsing, because it's a form of being aware of something in a different sort of way.
During the Cold War, Joe McMonigal in the US Army, he was given a task by the US Navy to go and look at a very large shed which was near the Barents Sea and see what was inside it. And he went and had a look at it and came out and said it was a massive submarine which had got some tubes for the missile tubes, and it was being made and all that. And they said, well, we don't believe this, because I mean this thing is about half a mile from the sea. He then went back every week for about a couple of months, and he saw that they dug out a channel from this place down to the sea, and he told them when it was going to be done, and they put a spy satellite, a KH-9 spy satellite, above the place, and they actually saw the thing being brought out and actually being put into the water.
A dowser friend and myself were invited to dowse at Waden Hill. The site bounded the West Kennet Avenue at the bottom of the hill, and at the top of the hill there were some existing Bronze Age barrows. We found on the middle of the slope several burials, about 15, 20 burials, and I also found a fairly straight feature, and the equipment, we were told, had broken down, so we couldn't see the geophysical results of where we dowsed. But a month later I went to give this talk in Wiltshire to the archaeology group there, and this chap came up to me and said, Eureka, you know, we found some very interesting things on when we married your results with our geophysics. And lo and behold, in the area where we'd found these burials, there was the mark of a round Bronze Age ring barrow. And where I had found this rectangular feature, there also was some sort of anomaly.
I would never ever guarantee 100% success on water divining. Always believed it's an art rather than a science, and as such we are only human. We are liable to make mistakes. At the moment, success rate with divining for me has been 8 out of 10.
The pendulum just whizzes round for me. And then sometimes I have to stop it. Sometimes it drags down on the page. You have your yes and your no signs, which for a beginning to dowse is all you need. As you get more into dowsing, you do get a danger sign, and you can get a sign that says, no, I can't work with this person. It can be the danger sign. Or there's another sign which says, you don't do this work. And sometimes you get silly answers and you think, I'm not meant to be doing this.
A suitable site to me would be one that has at least 3 to 5 courses which cross. If you drill on any one given source of water, you're limiting yourself. So if we can find multiple sources of water, and then we can find where they all cross over and drill, hopefully we'll find more water.
When I first got into this work, I did have a sort of crisis about, oh gosh, I'm being paid to do this job. It seems such a bizarre way of doing it, from a conventional method where they do these blood tests and stuff, and that this crystal pendulum could give me the answers. But the more I get into it and the more results I see, the more I trusted it. And once I trusted it, there's no problem. I'm comfortable with it now. And I think every dowser that does this type of work has to get over this trust thing.
With the stick, for me, with what I use, it generally speaking reacts quite dramatically. Other people will only get just a slight twitch or whatever. It really doesn't matter as far as that's concerned, as far as the individual. You must be able to interpret whatever you feel or whichever way it works for you.
I've run courses, and I've probably had about 250 to 300 students through my courses. When the group come in, I ask them to find a total stranger as a partner. Then I take them through a procedure where I quieten them down by taking them to a place like Stour Head or somewhere like that, and then up some steps to the edge of a wood, and then I say, in the distance you can see some buildings and a town, and the house of the person opposite you, the dwelling, is there. And would you go there? And I've had funny things like, for instance, there may be some parts of the house are at different times than others. I did one where a woman went in and she came to the door, and the door opened out into her face rather than inwards. Afterwards, the person that lived there said, yes, it used to be like that, but we've rehung the door so it's properly. She then went into various things, various rooms, and she went into one room and it was back in the 18th century, and there was a woman who was in there was dying. And he was confirmed that these were the rooms, the actual rooms that the man was living in.
When you've got a picture and you see what you're looking for, and you say, well, that's no help because I don't know where it is. So you bring that picture closer, and then you focus on something within that picture, and you might look for a street name, you might name the name of a pub, or you might notice the lie of the land, or whatever it is, but you bring the picture closer.
When I do the dowsing, I always protect myself, which is important. So I put myself, if you like, in a pink bubble. So I'm not picking up people's negative energies and problems, because you can take on board people's psychological problems, that type of thing, if you don't protect yourself. So that's an important part when you're working with other people.
Go out with your rods, ask very clear, precise questions so that you can tune in exactly to the period that you're looking for, or the particular thing you want to have an answer for. And you just have that question in your mind, like on the back burner, as it were, and you go out and you accept whatever your rods tell you, and that's it. It's it's simple, but it is quite tricky to have a clear mind and a very focused mind.
When I'm really into a severe dowsing situation, let's call it, that there's a certain area of my brain which is working. I don't think I'm in control of it. I think perhaps I've learned how to switch it on.
I get the answers to things and I'm thinking, why am I thinking about that? You just know, but I don't know how I know, which sounds a bit odd.
I think it's something to do with being able to put yourself to one side, which is what is common to all dowsing, surely.
I really don't know where the answers come from. It's the universe, it can be God, it can be anything that you are calling on.
You see the world in a slightly different way.
There's somebody up there helps us.
It's always interesting, it's always varied.
It's not me.
You could never get bored as a dowser.
All of this, essentially, are yogic techniques. And it's a question. One of my big questions in my mind is why science has not looked at, or psychology has not actually looked at techniques that yogins have been using for thousands of years. And all of these techniques that we're talking about, dowsing, remote viewing, and all these things are techniques developed by yogas.
My specialisation is in earth energy. I think the simplest possible way to talk about earth energy is to say that it's the Earth's nervous system. And to understand that, you've got to understand that the Earth is a dynamic, changing, living, pulsing being. And it's got every right to have a nervous system as we have. Every person has little subtle energy bodies around us, the biomagnetic fields. This is a geomagnetic field, if you like, which interacts with our biomagnetic fields and has profound effects on our physical being. It's infinitely complex. It's four-dimensional, it could be six-dimensional, we don't know. And many people pick up parts of this thing, which are certain kinds of grid on the Earth. I pick up energy lines, which are part of its whole system. And they are dynamic. Where they curve and where they cross are very special places, very sacred places. Many of them are ancient sacred sites. Sacred sites, of course, were recognized by the old people, the Neolithic people. And they were open, much more open to the subtle energies of the Earth. And when they were nomadic, and when they walked around, they would find a place where they felt good. And as soon as they stayed there, they started to commune with the cosmos. And that's their form of prayer. Their consciousness affected the Earth, and the Earth responded, and they could feel the response. And we underestimate their knowledge and their ability to relate to the cosmos and the movements of the sun and the moon and the stars and things like that. And they weren't diverted by all the things that we are diverted by. We really ought to know more about it, because it has such a powerful effect on everything we do. The thing about dowsing that's not really understood is that everybody thinks it's that dowsers can douse for everything. And in fact, this is true to a certain extent, but it's like saying everybody can play the piano, and that's true to a certain extent. But dowsers, like surgeons, like all sorts of different people, specialize in different subjects. And in fact, recently, I wanted to find some water on my land. And although I've been dowsing for 26 years, I got a specialist water dowser in, because they are the people who really know how to do it.
For this site, I think the yield would be around about somewhere between 150 and 200 gallons an hour. It's more water than any domestic supply would. It would run quite a lot of farm supplies.
Then I got on to Aaron Bray, who has the drilling rig, the compressors, and all you need to put whacking great holes in the ground.
We always douse the supply before we drill it. Geological surveys can only tell you so much. By water dowsing, you get a good choice. Some people believe you can drill anywhere, and they tell you that water on their land. It's not always the case. You know, the odd thing, geology affects things. Sometimes there's different factors that can affect things. Most of the time, you know, we're probably about 93% successful with dowsing.
When the guys were put the first drill down, Rolf said it would be about 120 feet. Well, they started to get it about 110, and that is not bad. It's not far out at all. So I'm absolutely delighted. This is a really practical demonstration that dowsing works. This water is 125 feet down. How else can you know that there is water there apart from by dowsing?
You've got to be very open to these things and not block anything. Just let the feelings and everything flow.
You can feel that pull, and it does it despite you, and that is a lovely thing when people realise it's not up to them.
It's like opening a door and you look in and you think, oh, I don't know whether I want to go there, so you close the door again, and when you're ready you'll open that door more and more and more, and you realise there's so much to learn.
Once people start it, I think it catches hold of them and becomes very important.
And it's fascinating. It's very exciting.
It is a built-in human capability.
And a privilege to do it.